Printing. So what about printing? Printing in Photoshop. How to print 3D objects. How to print 3D objects. By the way, with Photoshop, you can print any compatible 3D model without worrying about 3D printer limitations. And in preparation for printing, Photoshop, by the way, automatically makes 3D models watertight, and Photoshop also generates the necessary support structures and scaffolding and rafts to ensure that your 3D prints are successful. And so what about preparing to print 3D objects? How to preparing to print 3D objects? We have steps here now. Step number 1, you should select window, then select workspace, then choose 3D to switch to the 3D workspace. Step number 2, you should open the 3D model in Photoshop if necessary. Customize the size of the 3D model while opening it. And step number 3, you should select the 3D and then select 3D print setting, like the next screenshot, the next image now. Its properties explain for you now how to print 3D objects here now. And in the 3D print setting panel, by the way, you can choose whether you want to print to a printer connected to your computer through a USB port and local printer, and or you can use an online 3D printing service, by the way, such as shapeways.com or Sculpteo. And also you can now print 3D models as 3D manufacturing format, like 3MF files. And while specifying the 3D print setting, you can select print to local and printer and the 3MF file. And when you print, by the way, is a 3D object, by the way, Photoshop generates the 3MF file, and on computers running Windows, and Photoshop, by the way, also launches Microsoft 3D Builder for you to work further on the 3MF file. And also, by the way, to refresh the list of supported printers or online profiles, you should select Get Latest Printers from the Print to pop-up menu, and then select a local printer or a shapeways.com printer profile. And by the way, to view estimated prices for printing the 3D model using available shapeways.com profiles, you should select printer firstly, then select estimate price. And after that, you can select a unit for the printer volume, by the way, and inch and centimeter and millimeter or pixel. And the unit is reflected, by the way, in the printer volume dimensions as well as the print plate measurements, like the next image and next screenshot. We have A and B and C, and A is meaning 3D model here now, and B print plate, and C printer volume overlay. And we have steps here now. By the way, you can select step number 1, you can select a detail level, low and medium or high for the 3D print, by the way, and the time required to print the 3D objects depends on the detail level that you choose. Step number 2, if you don't want to see the 3D printer volume overlaid on the 3D model, deselect Show Printer Volume Overlay and adjust the skin volume dimensions to specify the desired size of the printed 3D object. And by the way, when you change a value X and Y or Z, the other two values, by the way, are scaled proportionality as you modify the skin volume dimensions. And notice that the print plate under the 3D model scales in proportion. And also you can scrub the value of the skin volume dimensions by clicking the dimensions label, like X and Y or Z, and then dragging the mouse left or right and hold down the shift key to make the value scrub faster, like the next screenshot. This image now explains for you scan volume. We have steps. Step number 1, you should choose scale to print volume if you want Photoshop to auto scale your 3D model such that it fills up the available print volume of the selected printer. Step number 2, if the 3D model, by the way, has normal maps, bump maps, or opacity maps, By the way, you can choose to ignore one or more types of these maps, by the way, while printing the model. And you will notice that the 3D model updates in real time when you change this surface detail setting. Step number 3. By the way, you may choose to not print the support structures and the scaffolds or rafts required for the 3D object, by the way, and you can't use this option with caution, and since the printing of the 3D model may fail if you don't print a necessary support structure. Step number 4. If your printer, by the way, supports multiple materials, you should choose the material that you want to use for printing the 3D object. And what about experimental enable multi-tone printing for MakeBot Replicator 2X? By the way, you can enable an experimental feature that lets you print continuous tones using your MakeBot Replicator 2X and 3D printer. And what about prerequisite enable experimental features? Prerequisite enable experimental features. By the way, as a prerequisite to multi-tone printing, you must enable experimental features in Photoshop, and you have steps here now. Step number 1. You should select preferences firstly, then select experimental features. Step number 2. You should select enable multi-tone printing, and step number 3, click OK. And step number 4, you should restart Photoshop. And note here, and be careful please, experimental features are not yet production ready, and you can't use these features, by the way, with discretion. And how to select the multi-tone surface material. How to select multi-tone surface material? We have 2 steps. Step number 1, you should select the MakeBot Replicator 2X printer in the 3D print setting panel firstly. Step number 2, under material, you should select multi-tool surface, and if this option, by the way, is not available for selection, ensure that the multi-tool 3D printing experimental feature is already enabled, like the next screenshot. And we have 2 steps again. You should select other options relevant to the 3D object that you are printing. Step number 2, select 3D, then 3D print to preview and print the 3D object. So what about previewing and printing the 3D object? What about previewing and print the 3D object? By the way, once you are done specifying the 3D print setting, follow these steps now. We have steps. Step number 1. You should click the start print icon firstly, or select 3D, then select 3D print. And Photoshop unifies the 3D skin and prepares it for the printing process. Step number 2. If you choose to print using a cheapways.com profile, by the way, Photoshop prompts you that the actual cost of printing may differ from the displayed estimates, then click OK. Step number 3. In the preview window that appears, you can't use the 3D camera tools to rotate and zoom or move the 3D object, by the way, and rotate the 3D camera, and roll the 3D camera, and pan the 3D camera also, and slide the 3D camera, and rotate the 3D camera to its original location, like the next screenshot. This image now explains for you Photoshop 3D print setting. And if necessary, by the way, you should select show repair, and the Photoshop displays the original mesh and wall thickness and closed hole repairs using appropriate color coding. We have now repair key. We have many colors. Green is meaning original mesh, and blue is meaning walls thickness, and red is meaning hole closed. And in the next screenshot, this image now explains for you. Preview with the show repair option enabled. And optionally, enable ray trace preview, and ray trace preview, by the way, previews represent the printed output more accurately, like the next image now explain for you, a ray trace preview. And you have steps again. By the way, if you want to export the 3D print setting to an STL file, You should click export and save the file to an appropriate location, by the way, on your computer. And you can upload the STL file to an online service or put it on the SD card for local printing. Step number 2. Review the 3D print summary and then click print. And also you can cancel an in progress 3D print by selecting 3D, then select cancel 3D print. So what about 3D print utilities? 3D print utilities. By the way, Photoshop provides interactive wizard based utilities that you can use for configuring and celebrating and maintaining your 3D printer. And also you can use these utilities only when the 3D printer is powered on and connected to your computer actually. And we have 2 steps. Step number 1, you should select 3D firstly, then select 3D printer utilities. After that, step number 2, you should select the utility that you want to launch. So what about Celebrate Print Plate? What about Celebrate Print Plate? It's meaning that helps level the print plate. This utility, by the way, performs the following broad steps, like prompts you to remove any leftover printing material from the 3D printer and initializes the print head. After that, let you adjust and fine-tune the gap between the print plate and the print head for 9 nozzle positions. And also you can use, by the way, this utility in the wizard mode on or in the manual mode. So what about load filament? Load filament is meaning that helps load a filament. Load filament helps load a filament into a fused deposition modeling FDM and the 3D printer. And Photoshop, by the way, initiates the head heating process and the filament loading mechanism for easy filament loading. So what about remove filament? How to remove filament? Helps you, by the way, helps remove a filament from an FDM 3D printer, and the Photoshop initiates the head heating process and the filament loading mechanism for easy filament removal. So what about change filament? A change filament is meaning that helps replace the filament of an FDM 3D printer with a new filament, and the Photoshop initiates the head heating process and the filament loading mechanism for easy filament changing, by the way. And what about back objects on the ground plane? Back objects on the ground plane is meaning that at times you may want to print multiple instances of the same object on the same part plate, and you should follow these steps now. We have 3 steps. Step number 1, you should select the required objects in the 3D panel. Step number 2, you should select 3D, then select back object on ground plane. And after that, step number 3, proceed with printing the objects. And what about FAQ? What 3D printers are supported? By the way, Photoshop currently supports the following local 3D printers. Supports MakerBot Replicator 2, and supports MakerBot Replicator 2X, and supports Z-Corp Full Color, and supports Maker Iris, and supports also MakerBot Replicator 5 Generation. And additionally, Photoshop, by the way, supports several cheapways.com and Sculpteo profiles. And note and be careful please here now. Direct USB printing with the MakerBot Replicator 5 Generation printer profile is not supported yet, by the way, and you can export the files you want to print to a USB stick and then print them locally. And can I apply a question here now? Can you apply a cross section to a 3D model before printing it? Again, can you apply a cross section to a 3D model before printing it? Yes, exactly. Of course, yes. You can define cross sections, by the way, to slice away parts of a 3D model before printing, and follow these process steps now. We have 7 steps. Number 1, you should select window, then select workspace, then select 3D to switch to the 3D workspace. Step number 2, you should open the 3D object you want to print. Step number 3, select scan in the 3D panel. Step number 4, In the properties panel, you should select cross section. And step number 5, you should specify setting for the cross section in the properties panel. Step number 6, you should select 3D, then select apply cross section to scan. Step number 7, you should print the 3D scan. And before printing, you must pick the cross section you have defined, like the next image and next screenshot now. This image now explain for you. Slicing away a cross section of a sphere before printing. Slicing away a cross section of a sphere before printing. And can you apply, a question again, can you apply bump and opacity or normal maps to a 3D model before printing it? Yes, of course, sure that. You should follow these broad steps now. We have many steps. Number 1, you should select a material in the skin panel firstly. Step number 2, in the properties panel, you should click the folder icon next to bump and opacity and normal and load a texture, and you can also define a new texture that you want to apply to the 3D model. Step number 3, if you are defining a new texture, by the way, you can save that texture, and the texture is applied to the 3D model as a bump and opacity map. Step number 4, you should print the 3D model. Like the next image now explain for you how to apply a bump map to a 3D model before printing. And the next image and the next screenshot, this image now explain for you also how to apply an opacity map to a 3D model before printing also. And can you print, a question again, can you print 3D models in 2 colors? Can you print 3D models in 2 colors? By the way, if your 3D printer is equipped with 2 heads, by the way, you can print 3D models in 2 colors. And the print properties panel displays pop-up options, by the way, for the additional heads available. And the 3D workspace and the 3D print preview display the model in 2 colors, by the way, like the next image and next screenshot. This image now explains for you printing a 3D model in 2 colors. And the next question, how are 3D models having multiple layers printed? How are 3D models having multiple layers printed? By the way, from a printing standpoint, each layer, by the way, in the 3D model is treated as a 3D object, and if necessary, you can merge. If necessary, you can merge 2 or more layers, like 3D or merge 3D layers.